Bonjour, mon nom est Nathalie Desrosiers. Ça me fait grand plaisir de vous avoir ici aujourd'hui. I first want to acknowledge that we are on indigenous land for many centuries, and this subject has a great deal of relevance to indigenous lives. I first want to start by thanking my OLIP intern, Hudson Manning, for his great work on this file. It's been a pleasure to see an OLIP intern getting involved in this file and believing the role of young people to look at serious issues as they are and the way in which corrections should be a reflection of our values as a society. Alors, aujourd'hui, on va procéder de la façon suivante. I'm going to introduce my private members bill, and then I'm going to invite Lee Chappelle, who is a former inmate and who has been working for years as a strong advocate for human rights in both federal and provincial correctional institutions. And then finally, Lynn McDonald, who's the former MP, holds the Order of Canada, who's been a long-time advocate for reform to the use of solitary confinement, and who's been pressuring me earlier as I was re-elected to deal with this subject matter. My own interest in the subject, my own knowledge of it, comes from when I was the executive director and general counsel of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. We intervened in the Ashley Smith coroner's inquest, and I got to delve a little bit more in the subject and hear the tremendous impact that solitary confinement could have on young people, on people with mental illness, the complexity of the issue, but the absolute requirement that we act on this. How we choose to treat those in our correctional institution is a reflection of our values as a society. Les Ontariens et Ontariennes ont toujours cru que le système correctionnel doit donner aux prisonniers le droit de se réintégrer dans la société. The idea that prison exists to help inmates pay their debt to society, but also develop back into being good neighbors, community members, and citizens is part of what a democratic society wants. This aspiration is fundamentally at odds with our continued unconstitutional use of prolonged solitary confinement in our province's correctional facilities. Far from the spirit of rehabilitation, solitary confinement needlessly damages people, makes reintegration difficult, and has exacerbated the mental health crisis in our corrections facilities. We have turned a blind eye to the consequences of subjecting inmates to prolonged conditions of isolation for greater than 22 hours a day for far too long. Recently, the Ontario Court of Appeal has declared as a cruel and unusual treatment, prolonged solitary confinement, defined as being held in solitary confinement for longer than 15 consecutive days. So therefore, the practice, to the extent that it continues, is unconstitutional. But we need leadership here, and we need to change. The bill that I'm going to introduce today has a plan to ban or eradicate the practice within 5 years. So it goes a little bit further as to where the court was willing to go, but speaks to the unconstitutionality of it. Solitary confinement has become a tool to manage inmates in our correctional institutions. It is overused, and it doesn't work. In some instances, it has become a highly inappropriate means of warehousing inmates with mental health issues, whether it is due to archaic prison infrastructure, poor training, lack of resources, or simply lethargy. It's time to act. En 2017, Howard Sapens a publié son rapport sur une analyse indépendante du système correctionnel ontarien et le rapport identifie clairement que la population carcérale en Ontario avait diminué au cours des 10 dernières années, mais que le nombre de prisonniers qui étaient ce qu'on appelle solitary confinement en français, c'est l'isolement cellulaire, avait augmenté de 2007 à 2016. Several hundred inmates between 2007 and 2016 were held in solitary confinement, although the overall custodial population had decreased over the last 10 years. So I think it is because of our lack of leadership and ambiguity in the legislative framework that we have continued to have this practice. And today, that's why I believe that legislative intervention is absolutely necessary. Over the years, we've had many scandals. Adam Capet, which was held in a state of isolation for 1,647 days at the Thunder Bay Correctional Centers. Howard Saper's report identified that 16.7% of inmates held in solitary confinement in provincial institutions were held for longer than 15 consecutive days. Its report also identified that there were 5 inmates in our provincial system that were held in solitary confinement for more than 3 years. This is horrifying, and we cannot let it go on. The use of solitary confinement exacerbates the mental health crisis in our provincial institutions. Indeed, Saper's report identified that many of the people that were in solitary confinement had been identified at suicide risk, and a great number of them, 41% of male, 54% of female, and 77% of trans, had mental health alert on their file. Locking people who urgently need mental health treatment in a room by themselves for nearly 24 hours a day under glaring lights is cruel and unusual, and it should no longer be tolerated in our provincial institutions. The onus is on us to change the nature and the culture within our provincial institution, but we also need to change the law. Obviously, this is not a criticism of the province's correctional workers who, for the most part, do very good work under difficult circumstances. It's a challenge to the culture and to the way in which the legislative framework has been unhelpful in this file. So today I will be tabling a private member's bill entitled Ministry of Correctional Services Amendment Act, Limits on Solitary Confinement. The bill, if passed, mandate the creation and implementation of a 5-year plan to phase out the use of solitary confinement entirely from a provincial correction system. It does immediately stop the unconstitutional use of solitary confinement for longer than 15 days. It also establishes a cap of 60 days in terms of aggregate cap for 1 year. It also invites the plan to fix strict limits so that 10 days would be within 1 year and 5 days within 3 years, so that we are moving to show improvement. The bill will make it explicitly illegal for superintendents and corrections staff to knowingly administer and instigate treatments or punishment that are recognized as being cruel, inhumane, or degrading. It will protect a certain class of inmates, including those with mental health concern, young offenders, and pregnant inmates who should be shielded from ever being placed in solitary confinement. It will improve oversight by establishing independent review panels that will be responsible for monitoring every instance of an inmate being held in solitary confinement. Superintendent will report every instance of an inmate in excess of 72 hours to such a board, who will be responsible and has a proactive role to make recommendations. Le but, évidemment, c'est d'éliminer cette pratique après 5 ans, mais entre-temps d'accomplir des progrès tangibles pour qu'on puisse s'habituer et changer la culture dans les institutions, parce que c'est trop facile de décider de mettre quelqu'un en isolation et de l'oublier un peu parce qu'on n'a pas les moyens ou n'a pas pensé comment résoudre le problème. Alors, l'idée, c'est de vraiment nous engager comme société à résoudre ce problème-là. The United Nations in 2015, called the Mandela Rules, provided that 15 days in solitary confinement was the maximum and should be banned for other groups, including young people and mentally ill. I think it's about time that we raise up to the challenge put by the United Nations and implement this in a proactive manner. So it is cruel, archaic, and unconstitutional to continue to have 15 days, people being held in solitary confinement for longer than 15 days. We cannot tolerate this status quo anymore. It has destroyed and damaged too many lives. So the previous Liberal government, as you know, had passed the Correctional Service and Reintegration Act last year, which would, if the government simply put it into force, substantially improve the rules on solitary confinement, instituting a 15 consecutive day cap on the use of solitary confinement. The bill has royal assent, is just that the government has not called it into force. So they could do that, and that would fix somewhat the problem. My bill goes a bit further because it does establish a goal of banning the practice within 5 years. It also eliminates the exceptions that were in the bill. I'm obviously willing to work with all of my colleagues on this issue and ensure that we are moving forward and ensure that our correctional services do comply with the Charter and are proud and happy to have a correction services that is modern and reflects the best practices around the world. Ça me fait évidemment grand plaisir d'être ici et je vais inviter sans plus tarder M. Chappell to address you.
Good morning. Sober subject. Thank you very much, Minister de Rosier, for inviting me to speak to this important subject. I have a great deal of insight into our provincial jails, beginning in 1983 when I was first in the Toronto East Detention Centre as a 16-year-old. I served an aggregate total of 20 years, 11 months, and 13 days for property crimes, and finished the end of my sentence approximately 10 years ago when I founded Canadian Prison Consulting Incorporated. And I now work with federal, provincial governments towards reform and private clientele. So to address the law, I'm a little torn. I think it's fantastic, particularly in this day and age in the political climate, to have a minister step up with something as strong.
I wish I were a minister. I'm no longer.
Oh, pardon me. Oh, pardon me. So I would refer to you as just Madame de Rosier. Okay, correct. Bon. I feel it's important because the political interest doesn't exist for the most part. Political will certainly does not exist. This is an easy demographic and a group of people to forget. And I'm talking about the people who work within our prisons and also those that are serving time. So given that the law states that the plan will be crafted by various stakeholders, I feel it is defensible. If people agree solitary is torture and that we should work to end it by way of adopting a law, I feel it is up to the players involved to figure this out. It is a lofty goal that importantly has the potential to trigger critical discussions around much needed reform and deep prevention. And when I say deep prevention, I'm referencing structural changes in society to help everyone's basic needs. We need to walk this all the way back. Targeted prevention initiatives as well as diversion and decarceration as goals. Diminishing imprisonment would leave more resources for staff and fewer prisoners, which has the potential to cool the temperature down in our broken institutions. Get people the help they need in the community instead of being jailed and placed in segregation and or solitary for lack of options. And most importantly, allow for more flexibility, resources to work with the most challenging cases. Make no mistake, as it stands, I don't feel this is viable or achievable if implemented with all else status quo. Under present conditions with Ontario Provincial Corrections, it will without question make our prisons even more unsafe than they are at present for both staff and inmates. In layman terms, solitary confinement is the end of the line. It is a jail within a jail. Therefore, abolishing solitary is parallel to abolishing all jails and prisons in our communities without addressing the social issues that lead to crimes. Limiting the use of solitary is something we direly need and should be working towards. With all the attention solitary confinement has garnered in recent years, and rightly so, you mentioned Ashley Smith, Adam Capet, with egregious cases coming to the light of the public eye. However, focusing solely on solitary without overhauling the system on a whole is missing the forest through the trees. With all the attention solitary, honored to be, blame game and partisanship politics aside, provincial corrections in Ontario is broken. And Ontario Provincial Corrections deals with considerable challenges. Population management, the transient and diverse makeup of inmate populations ranging from Form 1s, mental health holds, post-closure of forensic mental health beds, immigration holds, homeless, marginalized, increase of sex offenses, post-internet and shift in societal values, such as the Me Too movement mixed with gang members and those deeply involved with subculture. All of which are housed in super maximum conditions post-Ontario shift to American model super jails roughly 20 years ago. The super jails have massive infrastructures featuring austere conditions. They're resource thin in terms of rehabilitative-based productive use of time, and they lack varying security levels. What you mentioned earlier about Howard Sapers, if this could come to proclamation, it passed 3 readings, there's so many recommendations there that would start fixing the big picture so that we can then alleviate the strain on solitary from my perspective. So measurement of success. How do we measure success when it comes to our jails? Safety. Providing safe environments for staff and inmates comes to mind first and foremost. As it stands, people do not feel safe, and there is a glaring lack of vested interest on both sides of the bars, eradicated years ago, leaving a poor return on investment for all Ontario citizens. Again, we've turned to this American model system, and there is limited to no rehabilitative opportunity or productive use of time available. Frontliners see it more clearly than anyone. They live it. They're there every day. Hard to buy in for them when things are so dysfunctional with the stripping of incentives. And I think there should be incentives to reduce recidivism as part of our measurements of success. 65% of Ontario provincial inmates, roughly 8,500 people on a daily basis, are pretrial Form 1s, immigration holds, and approximately 35% are sentenced to sentences ranging from 1 day to 2 years less a day. The closure of Millbrook, Guelph, Birch Rapids, which were maximum, medium, minimum security institutions, removed a vested interest that was important for the people who work within our jails and for inmates to attain and work towards rehabilitation. We're resource thin. Reception and intake is where a strong focus needs to be placed. Disciplined, structured reception, filtering at the front end, including the implementation of electronic health records, orientation, information, sharing and gathering, essentially a concerted effort made to put people in areas compatible with one another, which will again reduce solitary. Provision of programming, treatment, creation of rehabilitative structured release plans. These are the type of things that I would think of when it comes to measurement of success. Reducing recidivism, addressing causality through provision of programming, treatment, creation of rehabilitative structured release plans. Institutionally, just as importantly, increasing transitional supports. I feel we could really do well to have community residential facilities for our provincial system, which would be less expensive for the taxpayer and also probably beneficial for public safety. Increase probation and parole officers, programming. Their caseloads are beyond belief. Minimally, we need to restore belief at the potential of rehabilitation in Ontario. And the fact is, while we have instituted a correctional system to deal with criminals, many of us, I understand, yearn at heart for a penal system, and I think that's what we have presently. The punitive desire is a natural reaction and an understandable one for those who have been the victims of crime. We like to see bad people go to jail because we're angry and we want to see them punished. The difference lies in whether we want to see criminals reform their behavior or simply suffer for it. So I'd just like to say I'm open to working with any party, political party, OPSU, the ministry, towards reform that increases public safety for all Ontarians through making our institutions safer, more productive, with the clear goal of reducing recidivism while ensuring the delivery of basic human rights for frontline staff and inmates alike. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn McDonald, speaking on behalf of the Campaign for the Abolition of Solitary Confinement. Harry Arthurs, Dean Emeritus of Law at Osgoode Hall, and John Godfrey, former Liberal Cabinet Minister, are members of our group that have consulted with Nathalie in the process of creating this private members bill. And I was not part of that process, but I'm here to speak for the group to say that we very much welcome this initiative, that we see legislation as being absolutely essential, and it's needed federally and in all provinces and territories, and it would be excellent to see Ontario give leadership on this. The cases from coroner's reports, judgments in courts, appeals on issues have been enormously strong in documenting the harm done from solitary. The media have been very supportive in covering the harms caused by solitary, the overrepresentation of Indigenous people particularly, and the mentally ill. And yet nothing happens. It carries on because it requires legislation. So we welcome this. And it's a good piece of legislation. We say abolition. This says abolition in 5 years. It will come through gradually. It's a reasonable way of proceeding. It will require the cooperation of officials and union members and their organizations to get something that is acceptable and workable. And we're not trying to change the whole system. A private member's bill can't change a whole system. It has to take on a fairly limited subject. So I commend Nathalie Desrosiers for bringing in this private member's bill, and I wish her luck in getting it through, and ask other members of the provincial parliament to support it. I might say, in my own history as a member of parliament, I was the author of the Non-Smokers Health Act of 1988, the first legislation of a private member's nature in Canada, perhaps the only legislation of its type in Canada that actually saves lives. And I think Nathalie Desrosiers has that prospect of saving lives.
Des questions? Merci. Des questions? Oui.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so you mentioned that your private member's bill goes beyond the Court of Appeal ruling and also goes beyond what your government had proposed last year. So can you speak a little more to kind of why you think it's so necessary? You're essentially diverging from what your own government was planning to put in.
Well, I think the bill and the legislation had a cap of 15 days and had the possibility of exception in it. And it was a larger vision of changing corrections. After the bill, the Court of Appeal decision came up. And the Court of Appeal decision is pretty clear that any exception would be unconstitutional, in my view, because it says you cannot hold someone for longer than 15 days. Without holding it longer than 15 days is cruel and unusual, and that's unconstitutional. So the bill would have to be amended eventually, or no exception should be ever granted if we were to comply with the Court of Appeal decision. I think the Court of Appeal decision is about one thing only, which is the cap on 15 days. I go further by saying eventually we have to end the practice, and I'm, setting a goal of 5 years with the recognition that it cannot be done like this. We can stop holding people for longer than 15 days because that's what the court tells us to do. But in the long run, I think it requires structural, cultural training, some changes maybe even in the architecture of some of our jails. So the process that I put in is that unions have to be involved, superintendents have to be involved, but we need a plan and we need to commit to that goal. So I'm committed to the goal of ending the practice, and I'm using the leveraging what was done in the past and the new decision of the Court of Appeal to say time to act.
Talk to the unions about this, OPSU, correctional officers, and
I had a meeting with the corrections officers that are obviously would echo the idea that the system's in crisis. So I am pretty sure that they need to be part of the solution. It's not going to happen without them. Not all corrections officers will be, I think they feel trapped by the current system, but I know that in the long run, the improvement to the safety, to their safety and the safety of inmates is in their best interest, and that's what they want.
Is your sense, sorry, just to clarify, is your sense from them that they like the idea of wiping out solitary confinement entirely?
I don't think that they would like the idea of wiping out without appropriate reforms to ensure their safety, and that's the reason for the 5 years and their participation in it.
L'isolement, justement, ça prend plus de ressources. Est-ce que vous avez chiffré peut-être un peu les ressources? Vous parlez même de créer un organisme de surveillance. Est-ce qu'on sait ça prendrait combien d'investissements?
Un organisme de surveillance est assez minime. Il y en a déjà beaucoup là, qui existent. Alors, on pourrait rapatrier certains aspects d'organisation. L'organisme de surveillance faisait déjà partie du projet de loi libéral d'avant. Alors, ça, c'est pas très original. Ce qui est original, c'est de lui donner des pouvoirs de recommandation, pas seulement des pouvoirs d'entendre des cas individuels, mais de faire des suggestions pour l'amélioration, par exemple, d'un établissement. Chaque établissement a un peu sa culture et a des défis, soit des défis d'architecture, des défis de ressources, des défis de personnel. Et donc, la solution va devoir passer par des consultations et un engagement profond des gens sur le terrain pour que ça marche.
Est-ce que ça sera accompagné, j'imagine, ça sera accompagné d'un réinvestissement parce qu'on ne peut pas faire tous ces changements-là?
Moi, je peux ça... on peut regarder ça de différentes façons. Le gouverneur de l'Ontario est poursuivi en justice par des gens qui ont été tenus en isolation pendant plus de 15 jours et dans des circonstances assez dramatiques. Il va devoir payer pour ses erreurs du passé si on veut arrêter d'être poursuivi en justice pour des violations de la charte. Il va falloir redéployer des ressources à l'intérieur pour s'assurer que la pratique n'est plus, ne continue pas. Je suis certaine que ça va demander certains investissements, mais j'ai l'impression que c'est moins coûteux qu'on le pense parce qu'on avait déjà fait les analyses avant dans le projet de loi qui est dernier.
Parler de votre proposition à la ministre Sylvia Jones ou à d'autres députés conservateurs?
J'ai pas parlé à Mme Jones de ce projet de loi-là, mais certainement je vais lui envoyer, comme je lui envoie tous mes projets de loi privés. Et je pense que c'est possible d'avoir une approche qui soit non partisane dans ce contexte-ci. On veut tous la même chose. On veut évidemment respecter la Charte des droits et libertés. Je pense qu'on veut le faire. Mon projet de loi dit qu'il faut le faire plus tôt que plus tard et le faire de façon proactive. l'idée, c'est de savoir, le but d'un projet de loi privé, c'est de soulever cette question dans le débat public pour s'assurer qu'on n'oublie pas les gens qui sont tenus en isolation.
Puis vous parliez d'un changement de culture aussi, quand vous répondiez à la question sur les syndicats. Vous ne pensez pas nécessairement que tout le monde, tous les employés des pénitenciers ou des services correctionnels seraient d'accord avec votre projet de loi?
Je pense que il y a certainement des employés qui voient l'utilisation de l'isolement comme étant un outil qui leur permet de gérer la situation présente. Et on le sait, c'était très clair dans les témoignages qui ont été entendus dans la cause qui était devant la cour d'appel, que la gestion de la sécurité, à la fois pour le personnel et pour les autres prisonniers, passe souvent par l'identification d'un isolement. La question qui existe un peu partout dans le monde, c'est combien de temps et de quelle façon est-ce qu'on peut avoir plus au lieu d'avoir un isolement qui est fait 22 heures sur 24, avec le droit d'une douche, avec très peu d'interaction avec d'autres êtres humains, est-ce que cette pratique-là, cette conception-là de l'isoloir 22 heures sur 24 continue d'être appropriée? Moi, je pense que non. D'accord? Alors, est-ce qu'il va y continuer d'y avoir des pratiques disciplinaires ou des pratiques... certainement, mais elle ne devrait pas aller jusqu'à l'isolement pendant 22 heures sur 24.
Sur un autre ordre d'idée complètement,
Oui.
Votre collègue Marie-France Lalonde qui pense faire le saut vers le fédéral,
Oui.
comment réagissez-vous?
Bien, je pense qu'on va attendre qu'elle prenne sa décision finale, mais on va certainement accepter sa décision, quelle qu'elle soit, puis on va lui souhaiter bonne chance.
Are you still thinking about running for OLP leader?
I'm still thinking about it. Obviously, the thing is changing every day in terms of what the outcomes are. It's a pretty big and difficult decision to make in terms of personal commitment and trying to gauge the support that I would have.
Dans l'éventualité où Mme Lalonde quitte le parti, est-ce que vous sentez que la cause francophone va vous retomber un peu sur les épaules?
Bien, ça me fait plaisir, comme toujours, de défendre la cause francophone. Ça fait partie de mon mandat depuis le début, depuis que je suis en politique et même avant. J'ai comparu devant la Cour suprême pour défendre les droits des minorités linguistiques et des francophones. Je ne vais pas arrêter maintenant. Merci.
Well, can you just answer that in English, your thoughts on...
Okay, the thoughts was, if Madame Lalonde goes into federal politics, will I feel that I have a heavier burden on defending Francophone rights? I've defended la francophonie for all my life. I appeared in front of the Supreme Court defending the rights of Francophones, so it has always been part of my commitment to Ontario to ensure that the rights of linguistic minorities are well respected. I believe that is essential for Ontario, but I believe it's essential for the survival of Canada as well. Well, I think we have to wait for her to decide. I think we have to leave her to decide.
Potentially, would you support her bid?
A bid to run. I will support whatever Marie-France's decision is. You know, I think she's a great asset in political life, no matter what level she chooses to go. Okay.